Hello, welcome to Microfiche Microphone. I'm Micah, and on this channel we look at microfiche from the past, old newspaper articles in the public domain. We look at them with our modern eyes, our modern perspective, and see what we can learn from them. On this microfiche time capsule, we are looking back at the Juvenile Instructor from October 15th, 1901, and this article is entitled Lives of Our Leaders, the Presiding Bishopric, Bishop John R. Winder. I'm relatively certain I'm pronouncing that correctly. If I am not, please correct me in the comments. But I have heard it said by general authorities, and so I think that's correct. In fact, this one will be very interesting in my opinion because John R. Winder was not only in the Presiding Bishopric, he was also later on in the First Presidency, if I am not mistaken, and I think that this was written before that, so they probably won't mention it, but we will do some fact checking at the end and make sure that I'm thinking of the same person. If I'm mistaking them, I apologize, but I think that's who it is. Anyways, but I don't know really anything about his life. I happen to have met a very distant relative of his once, but but I don't actually know anything about him as a person. So let's take a look at the article and see what we can learn. A little key may open a large lock, a heavy portal turn upon a very small hinge. By the way, this article was written by Orson F. Whitney, in case you couldn't tell. It's pretty obvious, he's very poetic. What we deem chance may be destiny, what we term accident, design. These axiomatic truths find a striking exemplification in the experience of Bishop John R. Winder at the time when he embraced Mormonism in his far-off native land, thus paving the way for his subsequent rise to prominence as a citizen of Utah and as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Little dreamed he before taking that important step that he was destined to leave his native land and participate as a pioneer worker in the building up of this Western Commonwealth. As little did he imagine, even after joining the church, that he would someday occupy his present position as one of its presiding bishopric. In civic, military, and ecclesiastic life, he has held various high and responsible positions, and has invariably acquitted himself to the acceptance of his official superiors, and to the satisfaction of his fellow citizens in general. That was in him to do whatever his lot may be cast. That it was in him to do this wherever his lot may be cast is unquestionable. At the same time, it was his espousal of Mormonism and his immigration to Utah that opened to him opportunities which he might never have had elsewhere, and out of which his useful and honorable career has been created. That career hinged upon what most men would call an accident, but which the bishop himself recognizes as a manifestation of the overruling providence of God. I guess that was to hook us in. Well, you succeeded, Orson F. Whitney. I want to read the whole article. Yeah? I would have anyway, but yeah. John Rex Winder, son of Richard and Sophia Winder, was born in Biddenden, Kent, England, on the 11th of December 1821. His parents were members of the Church of England, in which their son was baptized, sprinkled, when an infant. At the age of 14, he was confirmed a member of that church under the hands of the Archbishop of Canterbury. He received a very limited education, and early in life had to depend upon his own exertions. Well, that means that the family was poor, yeah? I think it's interesting that they specified that he was sprinkled. I think, knowing how baptism was in the Church of England, I think most people knew that, but I guess they had to specify just to be sure everybody understood. But confirmed under the Archbishop of Canterbury, I wonder how common that was at the time. That seems like kind of a big deal, yeah? When about 20 years of age, he went to London, where he obtained a situation in West End shoe store. On November 24th, 1845, he married, the maiden of his wife being Ellen Walters. Nearly 2 years later, a gentleman by the name of Collinson came to the store in search of a man to take charge of his establishment in Liverpool. Mr. Winder agreed to go, and in August 1847 filled his engagement, taking the position offered him in that city, where he resided during the next 5 or 6 years. I wonder why. Like, he was working in a shoe store, and suddenly they're like, hey, we need you to move to Liverpool. You know, I just feel like, were there not people who could do that in Liverpool already? You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't really seem that complicated. I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but that's just, my first thought. One day in July 1848, while in the store, he picked up a small piece of paper, a fragment of a torn-up letter, on which were written the words, Latter-day Saints. He wondered what it meant, for he had never seen or heard the name before. He asked one of the clerks about it, and was told that there was a church in America by that name, that they were also called Mormons, and that they had a prophet named Joseph Smith, and there was a branch of the church that held meetings in the music hall, Bold Street, Liverpool. Well, that's a very well-informed clerk. I'm assuming that he was either a member or had a family member who was. This, says Bishop Winder, was the first I had ever heard of the Latter-day Saints or Mormons. I went to their meeting, crept up the back stairs, and peeped through the banisters. Elder Orson Spencer was preaching on the first principles of the gospel. I thought he knew I was there, for every word he said seemed to be expressly for my benefit. Isn't it interesting how that can happen, yeah? I began to examine into the principles taught, soon became convinced of their truth, and was baptized September 20th, 1848, by Elder Thomas D. Brown. On the 15th of the following month, my wife was baptized by Apostle Orson Pratt. Hang on, 1848. When was he born? 1821. Okay, so he was 27? Yeah? And I'm assuming his wife was around the same age-ish, yeah? We were associated with the Liverpool branch until February 1853, when we left for Salt Lake City, sailing on the ship Elvira Owen. Yeah, Elvira, I think. And he was 32, yeah? We had 3 children living and 1 dead. 2 of the former being twin daughters, then about 4 months old. Oh, gosh. Imagine traveling across the country back then with twin babies. Like, it just, oh gosh, they're a lot of work anyway. And then, like, trying to travel with babies, it just doesn't sound fun. When about 10 days out from Liverpool, I was taken down with smallpox. Ooh, having caught it from a child who brought it on board and starting, and who was in the next apartment of the ship. I was the first to discover it. Soon, however, 5 others were found to have the disease. A small house was built on deck and we were all quarantined. Well, that's good. Thus my wife was left with her twin babies to care for without any assistance, and this was no small task on shipboard. Not only was it no small task, but she also had to be afraid of getting smallpox herself. Yeah? And the children as well. I mean, imagine the babies getting it. I would have been very concerned. Yeah, that doesn't sound fun at all. A few days later in the evening, about 9 o'clock, Brother William Jones, a young man lying next to me, died. Oh, gosh, can you imagine? Ah! And in a short time, the sailors took him out and cast him into the sea. They buried him at sea. Well, they had to, but wow. I mean, that's intense. As I lay there pondering over the situation, I heard the sailors say, "We will have him next," meaning me. I did not believe what they said. I had a living faith that I would recover and get to Zion. There were only 5 cases on board, and only 1 death. I'm sorry, but that the thought of catching smallpox is horrifying to me. I'm so glad it's been eradicated, but it was horrible at the time. Arriving at Keokuk, Iowa via New Orleans and St. Louis, Brother Winder, who had fully recovered his health, joined Elder Joseph W. Young's company, and with his family crossed the plains, arriving at Salt Lake City on the 10th of October, 1853. That's quite a journey, yeah? Soon after his arrival here, he engaged in business with Samuel Mulliner in the manufacture of saddles, boots, and shoes, and also conducted a tannery. Since he has experience with shoes, I'm assuming he learned shoemaking while he was working at the shoe store. In 1855, he entered into partnership with William Jennings, proprietor of the meat market, tannery, and manufacture of boots, shoes, saddles, harnesses, etc. Yeah, he's good with leather, yeah? He continued in this business until after the return from the move in July 1858. Prior to this, he had become prominent as a military man, having joined the Nauvoo Legion in 1855. He was captain of a company of Lancers and was in Echo Canyon during the fall and winter of 1857-58, being left with 50 men to guard the canyon and its approaches after Johnston's army had gone into winter quarters at Fort Bridger and General D.H. Wells and Colonel R.T. Burton had returned to the city. Interesting, because those are both big names, and I'm pretty sure I've already done articles on them. D.H. Wells is Daniel H. Wells, and R.T. Burton is Robert T. Burton, and I've definitely done one on Robert T. Burton. I'm not sure, did I do one on Daniel H. Wells? Now I'm not sure, but those were both prominent members of the church, yeah. Captain Winder's letter of instructions from General Wells may be found on page 661 of the first volume of Whitney's History of Utah. He references his own work. Orson F. Whitney, you. Come on. The following is an extract from that letter. Be vigilant, active, and energetic, and observe good order, discipline, and wisdom in all your works, that good may be the result. Remember that to you is entrusted for the time being the duty of standing between Israel and their foes. And as you would like to repose in peace and safety while others are on the watchtower, so now while in the performance of this duty do you observe the same care, vigilance, and activity which you would desire of others when they come to take your place. Praying the Lord to bless and preserve you in life, health, and strength, and wisdom and power to accomplish every duty incumbent upon you and bring peace to Israel. Okay. I don't know that that was necessary to quote. I feel like that didn't really add much to the story. Matters having quieted down, Captain Winder was relieved of vidette duty about Christmas time, Major H.S. Beatty taking his place at Camp Weber. Soon after, however, he was in the saddle. On March 8, 1858, he raised 85 mountain men and accompanied General George D. Grant through Tooele County and on to the Great Desert in pursuit of a band of Indians who had stolen a large number of horses from settlers in Tooele. The pursuing party was caught in a snowstorm on the desert, lost the trail of the Indians, and returned to Salt Lake City, soon after which Captain Winder was called with a company of men to take charge of the defenses in Echo Canyon. He remained there until peace was declared. What was the point of telling that story? I don't know, it didn't really add anything to the story. I feel like you could have just said that he was active in the militia. Like that would have been more than sufficient. I don't know, it really didn't add anything, okay. Having dissolved partnership with William Jennings, he formed another partnership with President Brigham Young and Farrah Moore's Little, and built a tannery on Parley's Canyon Creek. While engaged in this business, he purchased his present home, Poplar Farm, and commenced farming and stock raising, pursuits in which he has always taken great delight. Interesting, since he was a leather worker. When the native bark for tanning became scarce and they were unable to compete with importations, the tanning business was suspended. During the 3 years, 1865, 66, and 67, Captain Winder was engaged in the Black Hawk Indian War in Sanpete County, part of the time as aide to General Wells, and in 1868 as Assistant Adjutant General. He collected and made up the accounts of the expenses of the war, amounting to $1,100,000. Wow. I mean, that's a lot of money anyway, but that's a lot of money. This claim was submitted to Congress by Delegate William H. Hooper, but has never yet been paid. Oh, they asked the government to pay it. In 1870, Brother Winder was appointed Assessor and Collector of Salt Lake City, which position he held for 14 consecutive years. He served 3 terms in the City Council from 1872 to 78. In 1884, he resigned as Assessor and Collector and was appointed Watermaster of the city, occupying that position until April 1887, when he retired from it to enter upon his labors as second counselor to Presiding Bishop Preston, to which office he was set apart on the 25th of that month, by President George Q. Cannon and Apostle Franklin D. Richards. In April 1892, when the Salt Lake Temple was approaching completion, the design having been to finish the structure and have it ready for dedication in April 1893, 40 years from the time its foundation stones were laid, Bishop Winder was given special charge of the work of completion, and he discharged that duty with characteristic energy and zeal. He was a liberal donor to the fund, which met the heavy expenses entailed, and after the dedication was appointed and set apart in May 1893 as first assistant to President Lorenzo Snow in charge of the temple. That position he still holds. During the dedication ceremonies, President Joseph F. Smith referred in terms of high commendation to the faithful, persistent, and efficient labors of Bishop Winder in his superintendency of the sacred edifice, and pronounced a blessing upon him for time and all eternity. For many years prior to these later appointments, he held important ecclesiastical positions. In 1854 he was ordained to 70, and in 1855 he became one of the presidents of the 12th Quorum of the 70s. March 4, 1872, he was ordained a high priest by Presiding Bishop Edward Hunter and set apart to take charge of the 14th Ward, Salt Lake City, during the absence of Bishop Thomas Taylor on a mission. He subsequently acted for a season as Bishop Taylor's first counselor. In April 1872, he became a member of the High Council of the Salt Lake Stake of Zion. In addition to secular offices previously mentioned, he has held the following positions: Lieutenant Colonel, 1st Regiment Cavalry, Nauvoo Legion. United States Gauger? I think that's misspelled, unless it's Gauger. I think it's Gauger, yeah? In the Internal Revenue Department, and a director since 1856 of the Deseret Agriculture and Manufacturing Society, and he was president of that organization from 1872 to 1900 when he resigned. He was a member of one of the early constitutional conventions during the old political regime. He was for a long time chairman of the Territorial and County Central Committee of the People's Party. He was a director in the Utah Iron Manufacturing Company and is now a director of the Utah Sugar Company, also in the more recently established Ogden Sugar Company. He is president of the Deseret Investment Company, a director in ZCMI of the Deseret National Bank, and in the Deseret Savings Bank. He was vice president of the Pioneer Electric Company, also of the Union Light and Power Company, and is now vice president and director in the Utah Light and Power Company. Yeah, that's a kind of a bunch of random information, but okay. As may well be imagined, Bishop Winder's life has been most busy and withal a very useful one. He is a walking encyclopedia of general information on Utah affairs. Really, much of which pertains to times fast passing beyond the memory of the oldest inhabitant. In business he was known as a rustler. Isn't that bad, though? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you're known as a rustler, isn't that stealing other people's stuff? I'll look it up in just a bit, but that doesn't sound positive to me. He is sensitive, quick to think, speak, and act, but when not burdened with care, is full of jovial good nature. Honorable in his dealings, successful in his undertakings, he is eminently a good citizen, devoted to his religion and to the great general interests of the people of the state. His first wife, Ellen Walters Winder, died November 7, 1892. He has had 3 other wives, one of whom, Sister Maria Burnham Winder, is living, and he is the father of 23 children. He has 63 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren. At the advanced age of 80 years, Bishop Winder is in good health, active in the performance of his duties, and seems to enjoy life as much as he did in the days of his youth and prime. OFW, that's Orson F. Whitney. Interesting. Okay, first I'm going to look up rustler, because is there some hidden meaning that I'm not aware of? Because, like you think about rustling cattle, you know? Like, yeah, a person who rounds up and steals cattle, horses, and sheep. Like, please tell me there's another definition. I'm not seeing another definition. There's only one. Person who steals livestock from a farm or ranch. Like, seriously? Yeah, that's not a good thing to be known as a rustler. Oh my gosh. In business, he is known as a rustler. Yeah, that's not good. That's not good. I don't know. Like, it doesn't really jive with, like, everything else they just said, though. I feel like it was used incorrectly. Or maybe it was used differently in his region. But, like, yeah. Strange that they referred to him like that. I feel like there were too many facts in, like, points, like bullet point facts, so I don't really feel like I know who this person was, except that he was clearly someone who cared a lot about his area, wherever he lived, and he liked to work to build it up. Yeah. A leather worker who then ended up being a farmer. It's interesting. Alright, let's move on to the Wikipedia article, yeah? and I sincerely hope that I am pronouncing it correctly. I'm pretty sure it's Winder. I'm about 90% sure. Okay, so first thing that is jumping out at me is he served as second counselor in Presiding Bishopric from the 8th of April, 1887 until October 17, 1901. And the reason, that was like right when this article came out. This article was dated the 15th of October, 1901. This was just before that. So, like, immediately after this article was written, this happened. He got called to the First Presidency. He served as first counselor in the First Presidency from the 17th of October, 1901, until the 27th of March, 1910, which was, I believe, when he died. Yeah? 27th of March, 1910. Yep. All right. It's a bit longer than some of the other articles we've read, but it's not horrifically long, so let's go ahead and read it. All right. John Rex Winder, December 11th, 1921 until March 27th, 1910, was a leader and general authority of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, LDS Church. He was second counselor in the Presiding Bishopric from 1887 to 1901, and first counselor in the First Presidency to Church President Joseph F. Smith from 1901 until his death. He was well known for his business abilities and influenced Heber J. Grant. Influenced Heber J. Grant how? That's very vague. Okay, he was also active in politics and the militia, participating in the Utah War and the Black Hawk War, when the church came under heavy government pressure for its practice of plural marriage. Winder held the church's assets to keep them from being seized by the government. Really? He was a polygamist and had 4 wives and 20 children. I thought they said 23. One of them's wrong. So either this one's wrong or the other one was wrong. Oh, gosh. I don't know which one. I couldn't say. Interesting. Early life. Winder was born to Richard and Sophia Collins Winder in Biddenden, England. He worked in several trades as a youth, settling into a position as a shoe and leather man in his 20s in London. There he married Ellen Walters in 1845. There also he was recruited to manage a shoe store in Liverpool. Yeah, so far so good, yeah? In the shoe store he discovered the LDS Church and joined as a member. In February 1853, he and his wife set out to Utah to join the church there. He traveled across the Atlantic Ocean, nearly succumbing to smallpox on the way. They mentioned that. He then traveled via steamboat up the Mississippi River to St. Louis, Missouri, where he caught another boat leading up to Keokuk, Iowa. From there, he traveled with a company of members heading toward Utah Territory under Joseph W. Young. They arrived on October 10th, 1853. Yeah, that was all in the article, and it sounds all correct. Utah life. Engaged in leather work, Winder was quite successful in several ventures. His business sense became recognized, and eventually he found seats on several corporate boards. Of his ventures, one remains today, Winder Dairy. Interesting. I never heard of it. Winder was generous with his wealth. The poor, orphans, and widows benefited greatly from his efforts. Great. Winder also became a figure in politics and the militia in the territory. He led the Nauvoo Legion to stop the advance of Johnston's army in the Utah War in 1857. In the Black Hawk War, Utah, he fought as adjutant general. He was chief aide to General Daniel H. Wells and wrote up the expense reports submitted to Congress at the conclusion of the conflict. For $1.1 million, right? Winder also served as chairman of the People's Party. Really? His efforts to modernize the exercise of politics in the territory led from the church-dominated system to a two-party system, much like the national political system. Serving as a delegate to several states' constitutional conventions, he was an instrument in Utah Territory achieving statehood. I didn't know that. They didn't mention that in the article. They could have. It became a state, I think, 1896, was right. General authority. LDS President John Taylor called Winder to serve as counselor in the Presiding Bishopric to Presiding Bishop William B. Preston on April 8, 1887. During this time, the federal government began to put more pressure on the church for its practice of plural marriage. After the passage of the Edmunds-Tucker Act in 1887, church leaders went into hiding, and church assets were distributed to keep from being seized. Winder assisted many people on the run from the federal government by helping to hide them or to post bail. His poplar farm on the south of the city served as a temporary church headquarters for Taylor. Really? I'm surprised that there's such a thing as a poplar farm, but I think that they just mean that his home that he called Poplar Grove or something like that, because the poplar is a kind of tree, yeah, but like it doesn't produce fruit or anything. So, you know what I mean? Like it's just a flowery tree. I don't know. In 1890, church president Wilford Woodruff approached Winder, Charles W. Penrose, and George Reynolds to review and edit the manuscript for the manifesto. Really? He was involved with that. I'm surprised because he didn't really mention being interested or like active in any kind of like literary pursuits. With the publication and announcement of the manifesto, federal pressure was alleviated. Another significant contribution of Winder during his tenure as second counselor and the presiding bishop was his work on the interior of the Salt Lake Temple. He managed the interior work to be done and completed it much ahead of schedule. They mentioned that, yeah? That earned him praise from leaders of the church. After the dedication, Winder served as first assistant to Temple President Lorenzo Snow. Winder remained in the presidency of the temple until his death. Winder was called to the first presidency as first counselor to Church President Joseph F. Smith on October 17, 1901. One of the notable efforts that administration was the legal fight to get Reed Smoot seated as a U.S. Senator in the Smoot hearings. In 1909, the first presidency published a proclamation called The Origin of Man, which clarified the Church's position on human evolution and reaffirmed that men are the children of God and were created by Him. Okay. Well, that's kind of cool because, I mean, we talked about Reed Smoot and the Smoot hearings, but they didn't mention him specifically. I don't remember them mentioning him specifically as being someone who contributed to that. I thought it was George Buchanan who did most of the work there, but obviously I could be wrong, so yeah, John R. Winder, there you go. Apostle? ? Having never been a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles prior to his call to the first presidency, a situation which is a rarity in the LDS Church, there has been some dispute as to whether or not Winder was ordained an apostle at the time of his appointment to the first presidency. The LDS Church has no record of Winder being ordained to the priesthood office of apostle. Now, why would that even be a question? Because it's not necessary to serve in the first presidency. It is a rarity to have someone called who is not an apostle, but it's not unheard of. And I can list probably 4 or 5 people off the top of my head who were in the first presidency who were not apostles. For example, Sidney Rigdon. Yeah, not an apostle. Member of the first presidency. Who else? Let's move away from Joseph Smith, yeah? And let's talk about Brigham Young. Joseph W. Young. Daniel H. Wells. Member of the first presidency, not an apostle. Okay, let's go on to Joseph F. Smith. Yeah? John R. Winder. Let's talk about Brigham Young. Jedediah M. Grant. Yeah? These people were not apostles, and they were in the first presidency, and that's fine. Like, that's not an issue. I don't know why people were, like, arguing about this. It's not necessary to be an apostle to be a member of the first presidency. Now, I think that usually is called there because they work most closely with them, and they're, very closely attached to them. But I don't think that it's a requirement, and I don't think it ever was one. All right. Weird that people were like arguing about this. I don't think so. I don't think he was an apostle or ever had been. They might have referred to him as an apostle, members of the first presidency as apostles, seers, and revelators, but that doesn't mean he was ordained to the Quorum of the 12. Like, that's a completely different thing. Anyways, we're moving on, but that's just a little ridiculous that that's even a debate. People, calm down. Family life. Winder married Ellen Walters in London in 1845. We mentioned that. A practitioner plural marriage, Winder married Hannah Thompson of Salt Lake City in 1855, Elizabeth Parker in 1857, and later Maria Burnham in 1893. Through the first 3 women, he fathered 23 children. That's so funny. Why did they mention 20 before? I'm guessing that, 3 of them were died in infancy, but they were still people, were they not? Did they have names? Then they belong on the list, you know what I mean? Maria Burnham was from Fruitland, New Mexico Territory, where the LDS Church congregation was named the Burnham Ward because of her family's prominence in the early history of the area. Little nugget. It's not important, but interesting. Death. Winder died in Salt Lake City, Utah of pneumonia. He was buried at Salt Lake City Cemetery. Anton H. Lund succeeded him as first counselor in the First Presidency. There you go. There you go. There's a family monument of John R. Winder. I think he was a very interesting person, and I feel like this article was much more concise, saying that he was prominent in business and, served on several boards. That's enough. I don't think we need to know which ones, it's not important. So I think that this was a nicer, more concise article, also covered more time because the other article was written in 1901, and so it couldn't cover anything after that. That was really interesting. I hope you enjoyed that as well. If you did, please give the video a like and subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you in the next video.